So, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Eleni Kotzampasaki, and I work as an analytics team lead for Aquila Insight. So, Aquila is an analytics and technology consultancy. We work with clients such as Sony, British Airways, Tesco Bank, to name but a few, and we help our clients extract maximum value out of data and make evidence-based decisions. So personally, I sit in that yellow part of the triangle, and as part of my job, I work closely with clients to understand what their challenges are, help them shape the right questions, and work on answering those questions. So that involves anything from the data prep all the way to the more sexy stuff, such as predictive modeling, segmentation, optimization, that sort of stuff. But the most important part of the job is when we go back and present to the client. And what we need to make sure is that the client understands the value in the analysis and make evidence-based decisions off the back of the analysis we've prepared. So that's pretty much what I do for a living, in a nutshell. Just to give you a bit of a background about myself, I come from Greece originally, hence the long name and the funny accent. I've been in Scotland for 5 years now, which I absolutely love. I even love the weather. The only thing I miss from back home is my cat. So I've got this wee cat. He's 7 years old. His name's Zach. He's this ginger fur going all about the flat. He's running about, making my parents really angry. But I think he's the best cat in the world, and I like taking pictures of him. So here's a picture of him. What I'd like you to do is notice the difference in your attention now that I've put the picture in front of your eyes. Before, you only had to listen to me, or you had to be distracted on your own. I did not use any visual cues to distract you. However, now that the image is up there, your attention is split. And this is what's powerful about images. They draw attention. And that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about today, how powerful it is what we put in slides. Graphs are a type of image, and that's really important, because once I see something, I remember what I saw. So pretty much today, I'm going to be talking about my personal journey, about what I thought my job was when I graduated from uni, and what I found today, while I'm in the industry, what I found it is practically. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a couple of slides which I am not very proud of today, because they come from the very first project I worked on when I joined Aquila. So the project was a traditional propensity of renewal model, and I had worked really hard on it. I had done a lot of work on building the data, on running the right algorithm, on making it robust, on predicting correctly. I had done all the right things. However, what I did not take into account is that what goes on the slide and goes in front of the client is what really matters. So this is exactly what I had put in the slides. This is an exact screenshot from the slides back then. So it's the SAS output directly on the slide. And like that wasn't enough, I even had the SAS code there, in the appendix, thinking, I go there, I present, they have some questions. Thank God it's the code there to clear out all the questions. So luckily for me, I ran my slides past my boss before going to the meeting. He was speechless. I was thinking because the model was good, but apparently not. So my boss asked me, after a few moments when, he could, he was like, why would a retention manager be interested in that? And that's when it struck me. A retention manager would have no interest whatsoever in that type of stuff, particularly because they wouldn't have the time. They wouldn't have the background to understand it. And even if they did, that would not add any value whatsoever in the decision they would make off the back of the analysis. So after writing loads and loads of those decks and presenting to many clients across different industries, what I've come to realize is that there are two areas that I need to focus on when I'm writing decks and presenting to clients. It's all about making the data beautiful and telling a story with it. So let's focus on making the data beautiful first. What do I mean by beautiful? I don't mean pretty for the sake of pretty, even though there are benefits in aesthetic design, and it's always good to have it there in your slides. This shouldn't be the first goal. When I say beautiful, I mean beautiful in the sense that they are clear, they are effortless, it's easy for somebody to understand. So it's all about drawing attention effectively. Telling a story, what I always like to think of myself is like a film director that holds a camera and points the camera to the different scenes of the same set, gradually and in a nice flow, until finally I point the camera to the very final scene where I've got the important point and I want my audience to pay attention at. So if I do those two, I know that I'm going to be successful in communicating insight, and that's because what I'm saying is going to be memorable. I know the audience will remember what I talked about, and the analysis is going to be actionable. The audience will know exactly what they need to do off the back of the analysis. So these are the two areas I'm going to be talking about today. So let's start with making the data beautiful. Three rules I always focus when creating graphs for decks. It's all about color and using it sparingly and intentionally. It's about text, not being afraid to use text in slides. And finally, and most importantly, it's about making clear comparisons about what we're doing. So let's focus on the first one, color. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get practical. I'm going to go ahead and show examples because I think it's a lot more effective to get the point across. So what I've got here is a traditional product satisfaction survey and results on it for specific products. For example, basic current accounts, advanced current accounts, all the way to mortgages, and finally for brand. So what I'd like you to do is take a moment and think about how you feel about the satisfied segment, which is the one in red. If what this graph communicates to you is that being satisfied is something negative, then you get the message correctly. However, the message is not accurate. And this is exactly what happens when we let the tool pick the color for us. So first thing to do is shift the colors around. So we've got green, which bears a positive connotation for something positive, and red for something negative. However, I personally find that this slide has no meaning because there's so much going on. There's so much color competing for attention that it's almost hard to read. You don't know where to focus. So I think that a good practice is to shift everything into the background and think strategically and intentionally, where do you want your audience to look at? So what I've done here, for example, is I've shifted everything into the background and decided to point the attention to satisfied. So it's almost hard to miss that this is the point that I'm trying to make here, because it's the only thing that stands out of the graph. Still though, even though color has been used intentionally, this is a hard to read graph. And if it's hard to read, then it's hard to do because the audience will not necessarily have the patience to go through and read, for example, the text in angle. So what I've done here is I've identified clutter and I've moved that away, and it's a lot easier for my audience to read through. So now the axis is a lot easier to read, and also adding the dashed line to separate the brand from the product. Still though, there's some decimal points there. There's this cognitive burden that shouldn't be there. So a few more steps and it's much better to read. For example, here. So this is a nice graph because it answers the question it answers quickly and effortlessly a simple question: what does satisfaction look like? And what I always like to think when I create decks is the answer to the next question should be one click away. So naturally, what somebody would want to know is, what does dissatisfaction look like? And that's one click away. And what I've done here is I've used a different color to shift the attention to somewhere else on the same chart. So this page answers a simple question, a different question. So that's pretty much it about color and how we use it intentionally. Let's move on to text, the next section. So a common misconception, or at least something I used to think of when I started creating graphs, was that data speaks for itself and it does not need explanation whatsoever. But apparently, there is some text that needs to be there because not everyone will quickly understand what this is about. There's no context to it. And we need to have some text to give context. For example, what I've done here is I've added a more descriptive title. I've added a title to my axis. I moved the legend on top, which is really important. The audience will first read the legend so they will know what they're looking at before actually moving to look at the data in the graph. There's also a footnote which is not showing there. I had added a footnote with the source and any assumptions that are on the analysis, that sort of stuff. And also what I've done is I've spelled out acronym because not everyone necessarily will know what an ISA is. Probably they will, but there might be somebody in the audience who are not from the same part of the business or they won't know what it is. So it's always good to give some information for them. So that's about the text that needs to be there whatsoever. Another thing I always think it's a good practice is the title of the page. What we somehow tend to do, and I used to do it, I know that for sure, is that I used to have descriptive titles on my pages. And I find that this is not very beneficial because it's the very first thing the audience will look at when they go to the page, to the slide. And I kind of feel it's a lot better if we set the expectation about what's going to happen, not just describe what the data is in there. So for example, what I've done here is I've decided to call out brand satisfaction. So what I've done is I said, there's more satisfied than dissatisfied customers, added the numbers as well, and added the legend in the graph so the audience can look for evidence when they read the top of the slide. So that's pretty much it about text as well. And let's move to comparisons. So when we were looking at this analysis, many of the customers were saying that when they are dissatisfied, price has something to do with it. So naturally, the next step was to look at price and how that is correlated to satisfaction. So what I had done is I went back and looked at where we are in terms of our offering for price as opposed to our competitors and created a simple pricing index against the average. Plotted everything, put everything into Excel and plotted and had this nice spaghetti chart, as a colleague of mine likes to call them, which is effective when it's sparse, when the points are sparse here, but if somebody wants to see what's going on there, they need to be very patient, they maybe even need to hover over with their finger, so there's a lot of effort the audience needs to make to read through what's going on here. So instead of having everything there and having this graph that has no meaning and does not tell a message, what I did was take a step back and ask myself, why did I look in price in the first place? And that was because I wanted to see how it's related to satisfaction. So instead of looking at all products, what I've done instead was focus on the products with the highest dissatisfaction rates and the highest satisfaction rates, and have created those charts where it's a lot easier to see where we are as opposed to our competitors. And also this slide brings everything together because we've got consistent color for the text, which annotates what's happening, and color for the graph as well. So it's a lot easier and nice and clear to understand what's going on in this graph. And same for satisfaction, use a different color to flip the side of the coin. So that's pretty much it about making the data beautiful. It's about drawing attention effectively. And once this is done, once we have created some nice and good charts that tell a message, it's all about how we tell a story with it. So what I mean when I say tell a story, it's about setting the plots, the plot. It's about giving context to the audience and explaining what's important, what they need to know before they actually hear everything about the data. It's about unraveling the twists. What's interesting about the data? What do they really need to know? Why have we put the graphs in front of their eyes? And finally, the ending. It's all about guiding to a clear ending, giving them, pointing them to the right direction about what action they need to take off the back of the data. So before we go into any more detail to talk about the story, what I'd like you to do is read those facts here and shout out what story it is we're looking at here.
The Iliad.
Yep, the Iliad. The Iliad, or the Trojan War, or the story of Helen of Troy, whatever you want to call it. That's exactly what it is. Can you show hands how many of you remember what's the distance between Sparta and Troy? Yes, it is. Go ahead. 83 or 38? I win. I've seen that though many times. So that's the exact point I'm trying to make here. Facts on a slide are telling something. In particular here, it's not true, but they are telling something. But they are not compelling. They are not very easy to remember. So for those who don't know the story or did not have the time to read through the facts, I'm going to tell you the story. And while I do that, I'd like you to think of the plot, the twists, and the ending. So we've got Zeus, who tasks Paris to pick the most beautiful goddess amongst Aphrodite, Athena, and Hera. Aphrodite wants to win the contest, so what she does is she wants to bribe Paris. So she promises the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. So Paris picks Aphrodite, and Hera gets very, very angry. So what Hera does to punish Paris, she goes to Sparta, where Helen, or Eleni, the most beautiful woman in the world, is, and creates a likeness of Helen. So takes true Helen to Egypt and leaves the likeness in Sparta. So when Paris goes to claim his prize, he sees the likeness, thinks it's really Eleni, the most beautiful woman in the world, steals her and takes her to Troy. The Greeks become very, very mad. They want their beautiful queen back. So they go on a 10-year war against the Trojans. 10 years later, Ulysses thinks of the Trojan Horse, and they use the Trojan Horse, they invade Troy, take Troy down, and long story short, Menelaos, who was the king and former husband of Eleni, has the chance to go back into Troy and take his wife and take her back. But oops, he just realizes that this is a fake copy of his wife, and we were in a 10-year war with another nation for nothing, for a fake likeness of my wife. Therefore, in modern Greek literature, the name Eleni, or Helen, is associated with something spurious, something fake, rather than unmatched beauty, as it was in ancient times. And that's unlucky for me. So the reason I'm really attached to this story, because obviously it's about my name, and I really like Greek myths because it used to be my bedtime stories back in Greece. It's something that's in the culture. However, when I was looking for inspiration to make my charts and my presentations more interesting and make them more memorable, this is exactly where I drew inspiration from, ancient Greek myths, because they have a clear plot, clear twists, and clear endings. So this is exactly what I tried to, these are the elements I try to incorporate in my stories when I tell stories with data. So plot, it's all about who the audience is. When I present to a fellow analyst, my presentation is going to be a lot more technical than it would be if I was presenting to an executive, for example. It's also about determining the context. What is essential? What does the audience need to know before they listen and look at the data? The twists, what is interesting about the data? And one thing analysts tend to think is, oh, I've done so much analysis, I need to put everything in there because I'm proud of it and I want everyone to see it. But if there is no point, then there's nothing interesting about it, it's probably a good practice to avoid having something that's not making any sense in the slide. And finally, it's about the ending, which is the most important part of a deck. It's about what you want the audience to do off the back of the analysis. Sometimes, if there's no ending, you run the risk of your audience going like, oh, that's very interesting, this is very beautiful graphs, let's move on to the next thing. However, if there is a clear ending and a clear action, or maybe a recommendation, even if it's wrong, it still initiates a discussion. It might be the seed for another piece of analysis, or it might be, food for thought when they discuss with other executives, for example. So it's always important to have an ending there with an action for the audience. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you an example of how I would say this story with the data you've seen already. So to start with, I would give a context, as in, today I'm going to be talking to you about some customer satisfaction survey results. We've sent out a survey to our customers, and we've asked them to give us their opinion on how satisfied they are in terms of specific products and in terms of the brand. At the next stage, I'm going to be talking about price and how price is related to satisfaction potentially. And finally, I'm going to be recapping and giving some next steps and recommendations about how to increase product satisfaction. So before we go in and look at the data, the products we are looking at are mortgages, personal loans, credit cards, ISAs, savings, overdrafts, and current accounts. And underneath the dashed line, we've got the brand. So let's look at the data. Overall, we've got more satisfied than dissatisfied customers, and that's brilliant. We're doing really great in that area. So that's about brand, but what's the story about products? What's happening there? Let's focus on products then. What I've done here is I've ranked the products by satisfaction rate. And what we see is that 1 in 2 customers who hold a mortgage are satisfied, and that's a very high score for satisfaction. We're doing really great in that area. That's brilliant. If we look further down the rank, what we see is that we've got deposit products at the top of the rank. And when we compare it to the bottom of the rank, we see it's unsecured lending customers among the least satisfied. So that's pretty much it about satisfaction. Let's talk about dissatisfaction. What the data tells us is that we've got, among the most dissatisfied customers are the personal loan holders. When we compare that with the bottom of the rank, we see that mortgage customers, i.e. secured lending, are the least satisfied. So we've got unsecured lending on top and secured lending at the bottom in terms of dissatisfaction. Another very important point that came out of the analysis is that our basic current account holders are 3 times more dissatisfied than our advanced current account holders. So let's bring price into the game. What we've done here on the left, we've put our products with the highest dissatisfaction rates, and on the right, our products with the highest satisfaction rates. And we've looked at a price. How do we compare against the market? So what I've done here is I've created charts, and the dark gray bars is where we are, the light gray bars is where our competitors are. Let's focus on dissatisfaction then. What we see is that price is a driver of dissatisfaction indeed. The highest dissatisfaction rates were marked in products where we are very expensive, the most expensive in the market. In terms of satisfaction, what we see is that the highest satisfaction rates were marked in products where we are competitive. A very interesting thing was about the advanced current accounts. What we've got is that even though we have very high satisfaction rates for this product, we are still very expensive, probably the most expensive in the market. So that actually leads to the conclusion that even though the price is high, our customers draw satisfaction from other benefits that come with the product rather than price. So just to summarize, we've got more satisfied customers than dissatisfied. Unsecured lending products have higher dissatisfaction rates as opposed to secured lending. price is an important driver of satisfaction. So if you want to improve the satisfaction for your unsecured lending, either improve the price or introduce product benefits that come with the product to make your customers happier. So that's an example of how I would present the story with the data to my audience and guide them through what's happening in the data and a clear ending. So to summarize, does anyone recognize the guy in the picture? Yes, that's Joe Strummer, frontman of The Clash, one of my favorite bands ever. So when he was asked where he draws inspiration from, Joe Strummer used to say, everybody has a story to tell. So I'm going to change that a little bit and say, every chart has a story to tell, as long as it's beautiful and embedded into a story. Thank you very much.
Eleni, that was absolutely brilliant. I'd like to see a massive Efaristo Pali.
Oh, that's nice.
Questions, people? I've got one to kick off. And you mentioned at the very beginning the things you know now in comparison to the things you know. If you could go back in time to your very first project, what that you know now would you wish that you know then? What's been the biggest difference in terms of your storytelling from now until then?
The biggest difference is that right now I have a different mindset in the sense that the very first question I ask myself is, what does the audience want to know, rather than what do I want to show them? Because as I said, I was very proud about the analysis. I was very technical. I wanted to tell everything about neural nets, random forests, and nobody really cares about that. I can guarantee you that. And plus, in the end, it was just a logistic regression. So, so yeah, it's more about what does the audience want to know. That's the biggest thing that changed the way I think about DEX.
Any questions?
What tools do you use to make your charts beautiful?
Sorry, say that again?
What
Tools. So I personally use Excel because I don't like Tableau. But my kind of feeling is it's about learning how to use a single tool and using it well rather than trying, do something here with Excel and maybe something fancier with Tableau. I'm a big fan of easy charts that people have already seen before, and there's no learning curve about what am I looking at here and where do I need to focus. So Excel does a really good job on that. So I personally stick with that.
Another question?
I was wondering what you do when you don't know what the story is.
Still, as I said, even if the story is not right and the outcome is not, the conclusion is not right, it will initiate a discussion with the client. As I said, we work with different clients across different industries, so we are not necessarily as close to their business as they are. So what I might think as something interesting and compelling, they might say, oh, we know that already, that's no news to us, for example. But still it will initiate a discussion. So I try to find always a story to tell, even if it might not be the right one for what the audience is expecting.
You have some techniques there that almost say, try and use them. Rank the data, because then you'll see if there's some kind of correlation there. The idea of, I suppose for you, it should be Spartan. Just get rid of anything that actually doesn't actually.
Yeah. So. So what I tend to find is that if I add too many things in there, I lose the attention of the audience because they're trying to find something interesting in it and it's not there. So probably what they expect is that even in the next page, there's nothing there either. So if you add too much in it, you run the risk of losing the audience attention for when you've got something really interesting to say. So I suppose in this sense, less is more, always.
I've always worked with ink ratios. It's like the story has to actually be worth putting the ink on the paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any more questions? No?
You said for your first analysis you use SAS as a software. If if you're doing that today, would you use the same software?
No, absolutely not. That's the only thing I know for sure, yeah. Not anymore. We've moved more to the open source type of thing. And there's a lot more capability and support online as well, so absolutely. R is my preference at the moment. So.
Would your customers want to use SaaS data sets?
Depends. What I see as opposed to 3 years ago is that more people have shifted to the open source. Even some of our big clients cannot really afford the expensive SaaS licenses, so they do use open source these days. Absolutely.
That we are finding from both the human resource and the recruitment perspective, almost every brief now that we work to asks for R. And when we started hearing this maybe 5-6 years ago, more and more organisations became basically just didn't want to pay the cost of all those licenses. And they knew R was out there, and at the time there was the move towards big data science. So it's becoming more and more common now for we'll say something like SaaS skills would be nice, but R would be great. And it's happening more and more often.
SaaS sports R now.
Sorry, say that again?
SaaS sports R.
Oh, okay, that's brilliant then. I haven't used it in a long time, to be honest, so. I will do.
No more questions?
When you've had a data set to look at, have you ever had that situation where the data was inconclusive and you've had to go back to the client to say that this needs more data?
So before actually going back and saying that, what we tend to do is try a few things ourselves as well, enrich it with external data ourselves, and to try to find something in there to go back and present. And even, as I said, if it's not quite right, it will initiate a discussion. So it's all about not just going with a question, but going with a question and a potential answer to it. Yeah, but it happens that you've got data that's inconclusive and the analysis is not showing something very interesting, probably. Yeah, it happens. Yeah?
Your presentation has been about using visualization to tell the people story of the client. Is there a separate presentation, maybe some other time, about when you first get the data and you need to explore it? Do you have a bunch of visualizations that you keep in your back pocket that are presented with the new data set you go to, and that allows you to see things initially before drawing an insight?
So I wouldn't say that there's a single recipe that fits all, and that there's always certain steps that you would take. Anyway, it depends on the piece of analysis, and I would be a lot more focused, for example, if I was doing a model rather than just descriptive analysis. But I suppose for that benefit, you can always use dashboards or that sort of stuff where you can just plug things in and select and have quick and easy graphs. But still, even though I personally don't like I'm not a big fan anyway of the data prep part, which takes most of the time. I find quite often that if I don't spend time working on the data and looking at it very closely, I will never get the insight. So if somebody else prepares the data set for me, I will not run a good model. So it's always good to be close to the data. And so just to answer your question, I don't think there's a recipe that will fix every single data set. I suppose it's bespoke analysis each time. Depends on the nature of the data.
More questions, folks? Is that us?
Thank you.